Alrighty, welcome to the Hearthstone GvG Meta Report for week number 6. Yes, we've been doing this now for 6 weeks. God help us all. Alright, so every week we do the show, we take a look at what's in the meta, what's new, what's cool, what's effective, and sometimes just what's fun. Alright, so this week, starting with Druid, we've got the Hobo Druid. Now, I had a great time playing this deck. Yes, I actually play these decks or I play against these decks. And that's the only way you can give a good, effective comparison. Alright, so, Hobo Druid. Minion Hyper Aggro. Well, what is Hyper Aggro? Okay, see Hunter? Then bump it up a notch. This is literally almost a pure 100% face deck. I wish I was joking. You only trade when you absolutely have to. And even then, you can kind of get away with not doing it. The deck uses the fact that Savage Roar is dirt cheap, as well as Enhance a Mechano, plus combinations using Hobgoblin and several one-attack minions that are loaded throughout here. I mean, you got Imp Master, which is a generator on its own. You've got Argent Squire. You've got a Noyotron. You've got the Echoing Ooze, Haunted Creeper, Undertaker. Little side note here. Haunted Creeper, when it breaks open, those minions will not get the +1/+1 because they were not summoned. Alright? So your early game is pretty much any of your low drops. Seriously. And you could just play this hog wild. If you get Jeeves in your opening hand, that will pretty much guarantee you're going to go hog wild with laying out as much as you possibly can. And burning down your hand and just always getting 3 back. Always getting 3 back. By the way, this will make Jeeves a huge target. Just to put that out there. So if you can possibly put Jeeves out and say, oh, Mark of the Wild it's actually quite effective. Though sometimes it's actually better to, put that on the Echoing Ooze. Just saying, it's a defensive option. Alright, so the deck is actually pretty solid. The original version did not use Ogre Brutes, but this one does, and the Ogre Brutes make a huge impact, alright? Just for the chance of being able to knock out Tinkertown Technician is just an amazing value all around and can deny a lot of things. Against other aggro decks, this deck does really freaking good. Against control decks, it can stomp the living shit out of them. Mid-range can kind of handle this. Paladins will tear this deck apart because, well, they have an AoE. Same with Priests because, well, Circle of Healing is really disgusting. So it's super fun, super effective. You could use this to grind all the way up to rank 5 pretty consistently, and then probably switch to something a little bit more late game playing, like your generalized control decks and or mid-range decks. So it's a really fun deck. I highly recommend this. Check it out. All right, moving on to the next one. Top 100 Legend Solid Control Hunter. This deck's name is a little confusing because in many ways this plays more like a mid-range and less like control. And I wish I was joking on that, but it's God's honest truth. So this is a hunter deck that is not aggro. Yes, as you'll notice, there's no Undertaker because I guess apparently some hunters actually have self-respect. So let's take a look at this. Explosive traps, freezing traps, these are standard tools that hunters have been using and abusing forever and a day, and they work, so why not? But we also notice it's using a multi-shot because why not? It's actually a great tool against mid-range and aggro, though in control matchups this kind of falls flat on its face. Alright, Dr. Boom because he's amazing, Sylvanas because she's amazing, Ragnaros because they're amazing. These are some really high value minions that'll get a lot of work done. So now, your early game is pretty much going to consist almost entirely of Web Spinner. Sad to say, yes. Web Spinners, Mad Scientists, you never want any of your traps in your opening hand. Eaglehorn Bow is also not a bad one to get. Iron Beak, definitely don't want this in your opening hand because you'd much rather have it later on. Arcane Shot is actually good, especially against aggro, which is why it's here. Okay. Animal Companion, still a great card to get in your early game. But yeah, you pretty much use your minions, you tempo trade, you control the board, you remove options that they have available, and then you play out your big game and get some insane value. Now you'll notice that a lot of these minions have Death Rattle. This is where Feigned Death comes in handy. So the idea is if you can get a couple Death Rattle minions on the board at one time and play Feigned Death, you get insane value. But in a pinch, like turn 8 pinch, Sylvanas Windrunner plus Feigned Death is really great. I mean, this is like, oh, by the way, yes, I will take that giant. Oh, by the way, yes, I will take that Ragnaros or your Sneasel Shredder or your whatever. Just take it outright and still keep the Sylvanas. That is value on top of value. All right. Now, I've seen other decks similar to this that were running like Baron Rivendare and all that for that kind of gimmick. And while that is kind of cool, it is nowhere near as effective because that's way too much staging you have to do. All right. And of course, you know, you can't run any kind of mid-range or control hunter without high mains because it's a really nasty body that hunters have been using and warriors can't stand. All right. So really solid deck. When I played this, it had a few issues with certain decks, but then I realized it was just a learning curve of it. And when I replayed those matches later on, I was actually walking through a lot of it. Paladins did give me a little bit of a problem because, you know, they can heal, and that muster for battle combo is quite difficult to deal with because you really have no way of dealing 3 damage AoE, and that's kind of a really important thing. So deck is pretty solid, and it's a great alternative to your traditional face, lack of skill decks. All right. Next up, we have the Kolento Fatigue Mage. This is a really interesting deck. We actually got to see it played on the ESL championship thing they did with Frodan and somebody else doing the casting for. Now, I watched Savage play this deck, and unfortunately, he got kind of a raw deal with it. But I've also seen this deck work in several other instances, and it's really disgusting. But the problem is, this is a gimmick deck. All right, it'll work a lot of times more in a tournament environment, more of a top-end meta environment than it will in your average meta play, i.e. like 5 to legendary. This will probably do really good, but anywhere else, not so much. So the idea of the deck is not to engage your opponent. No, seriously, it's actually not to engage your opponent. All the jokes that Hearthstone history made about Kolento, yeah, this is starting to look a little bit true here. So none of this is actually meant to engage your opponent's board. You got Frostbolts for your early game removal options, but where it gets interesting is Death Lord. Okay, so people have been saying, oh, Death Lord's a horrible card. Why ever the fuck would I play Death Lord? Okay, here's why you play Death Lord. All right, it's putting a minion from your opponent's deck into play. Whoa, what if they get this? Okay, yeah, that would suck. But hey, guess what? You've got options to deal with it. Lots of them. But let's say it's a Battlecry minion. Oh, look at that. Their Battlecry is now useless. Let's say they get Chiraxes. That takes a great amount of what they could possibly do or the game plan for a handlock and throws it right out the fucking window. So that's a really huge thing. Plus, it's shrinking your opponent's deck down while not shrinking yours. That's a really important thing. And most likely, if you play this on curve, you could probably get another one out and still play it on curve and probably get Echo Medivh, and you'll probably have 2 of these in play, which means you can play even more and thus get them closer to fatiguing themselves even quicker. All right? However, that is kind of a dangerous thing. Okay, so we're also running Doomsayers in this deck and Blizzards and, you know, Frost Novas, because that's pretty typical of what you would expect in a Freeze Mage deck, and this works on similar principles. So you're actually going to want your opponents to get a big board, and then you're going to want to wipe it away. You know, just bye-bye, goodbye. That way, you're wasting pretty much every resource they have, and their card pool is dwindling rapidly. But yours, not so much. Now, to help accelerate things, this deck also runs an Alexstrasza. Now, this can be used either to negate a lot of life that your opponent has, that way they die quicker, or let's say you're really low on life and you're in that fatigue game. Guess what? You Alexstrasza yourself. That resets your clock, but theirs is still running out. So, yeah. And of course, you know, Sludge Belcher is great defensive options. Now, I really do like a few things in this deck, one of which is Exploding or Explosive Sheep. These guys are amazing. Just absolutely amazing. Because, you know, this plus hero power equals 2 damage AoE, this shreds a lot of aggro decks. It won't do much to control or mid-range decks, all that, honestly. I mean, it'll damage mid-range a little bit, but for control, this is not really all that relevant. It's also running double heal bots because, you know, health does matter. All right? Now, when you get over to secrets, it's got Ice Block and duplicates. Now, the duplicates make sense, you know, get more Death Lords out, get more Cold Light Oracles, just so you can kind of mill your opponents some, just like hasten their demise. But literally, there's nothing in here that is meant to actually physically deal damage to your opponent, with maybe the exception of Alexstrasza. So, yeah, the deck is really nasty, but the thing is, it's not as consistent as, you know, people would like. It runs a very fine razor's edge that when it works to such a degree that your opponent is just soul crushed. But as Savage found out, it sometimes can backfire. So keep that in mind. Alright, so now we're on to Paladin with Life Coach's Punisher. Alright, now normally I have problems with Paladins because Muster for Battle plus Quartermaster is such a hugely powerful combo. And it is. It basically requires that you have a 3 to 4 damage AoE on demand in order to deal with it. True facts. But I actually do like this deck. Mostly because, hey look, Hogger's here. Hey look, Captain Greenskin. Now Captain Greenskin makes so much sense in Paladins, especially with Muster for Battle. Because Muster for Battle, Light's Justice, pretty fucking garbage card. Let's be honest here. But Captain Greenskin makes it better. It also makes, you know, True Silver Champion better, makes Coghammer better. So, I mean, why wouldn't you play Captain Greenskin in this deck? Now, Hogger is a really important tool, and I'm going to get to that here in a minute. Now, in your early game, you're looking at Zombie Chows and Shielded Minibots to kind of set tempo, maybe an Outdoor Peacekeeper, you know, to, like, I guess on Tinkertown Technician or something like that, just to kind of remove that early game, you know, mid-range presence and get some value there. You've got Defender of Argus, which is an impromptu, oh crap, I'm getting zerged and I don't have my removal options here. Let me create a wall. So that's always good. But where we get to some interesting stuff is the moment you can play Hogger. So Hogger, in general, is considered a bad card because there's ways of dealing with it. But in many aspects, it's not as easy as people think about. If you're playing a really good control game, Hogger coming down is going to deny any kind of recovery right away, unless they're running something like, oh, Akanai's Circle Healing combo, which them blowing it just to deal with one Hogger is an amazing trade value all day long for the Paladin. So that's always good. And of course, like every single Paladin deck, Tyrion Forge Ring at the back end just to seal the deal. But most of the time, you'll probably end up beating them, you know, with the muster combos, as well as, you know, just general attrition using Loethevs, Piloted Shredders, Shielded Minibots. Now, another cool thing about this is it's not wholly reliant on lay on hands for card renewal. It also runs Acolyte of Pain. So, yeah, at first this may seem like, well, you know, they took out a minion that they could probably use a little bit better, like a Defender of Argus or maybe another Piloted Shredder. Yeah, they did. But they're getting a little bit more consistency for the trade. Now, like most Paladin control decks, this thing runs a huge amount of 1-drops. I mean, a lot. If we count, let's see, that's 4 plus 2, that's 6, plus 3, that's 9, plus 1, that's 10, 11, 12 1-drops in this deck. That's quite a bit of inconsistency and lays itself more to utility than functionality. So, but that utility, as I said, does come at a cost of functionality, but it works. It really does. And Paladin is one of the few classes that can get away with this. So, it's a really cool deck. I've seen a lot of different variations of this being played, and they're really, really cool. Some people who don't have Captain Greenskin have actually subbed him out for Harrison Jones. This works sometimes. And it's not as nearly as consistent. All right. Moving on to Priest. Yes, Priest, everybody's favorite class. Okay, so we've been seeing Priest kind of dividing up into two camps. We've got Death Rattle, and then we've got the more control variants. So today we're going to be covering one of the more expensive control variants I've ever seen. This deck literally looks like Priest had a talk with Warrior and said, hey, I could be just like you. And Warrior said, no, you can't. And then Priest came back and said, want to try that again? And Warrior just went, oh, fuck. No. Yeah, literally it is. I mean, count the legendaries here. Baron Geddon, Dr. Boom, Harrison Jones, Prophet Velen, Ragnaros, Sylvanas, the Black Knight, and Vol'jin. 8 legendaries. This is not an F2P deck in any way, shape, or form. Matter of fact, a lot of the comments I've seen about similar decks like this for Priest have screamed the word try hard. Though I completely disagree with that. I really do. Now, what I like about this deck is it definitely has an anti-aggro core using Wild Pyromancers, as well as Akanai Soul Priest, Circle of Healing combo, Holy Nova, and then you get things like Holy Smite, Powerwood Shield, which work great with the Wild Pyromancer. I mean, Holy Smite plus Wild Pyromancer basically says, no, your Undertaker can go to hell. And I like that. But in the more control-focused matchups, this deck does really good as well because, oh look, Vol'jin plus Holy Smite is a removal and kind of makes up for the fact that, you know, there's only one Shadow Word Death. Now, a lot of decks that are control-based basically have to have, like, kind of several win conditions or one really powerful one. So, I mean, this one's running, you know, Vol'jin, which is more of a mid approach. It's running Sylvanas, again, more of a mid approach. Ragnaros is definitely an endgame finisher and could do some amazing things. Dr. Boom, same. Baron Geddon is very interesting to say the least kind of tech there, but it's effective because, you know, Priest can heal back the damage it does. But Harrison Jones, because card draw is important. But then we get to Prophet Velen, and I kind of was looking at this deck and I went, well, can I do this without Prophet Velen? Yeah, you can. It's just not as good. I mean, this deck did make #1 on the NA servers for a little bit. So why is Prophet Velen here? Well, okay, so healing, that's cool, but when you're able to reverse that heal into damage, which you can do with the Akanai Soul Priest quite nicely, I might add, that actually gets very interesting. So Akanai Soul Priest is now hitting for 4. Light of the Naru, while Akanai Soul Priest is out, is now hitting for 6. So yeah, Velen comes out, nobody messes with Velen, he still persists the next turn. Guess what? Akanai plus hero power plus Light of the Naru. Congratulations, that's 10 damage right there, not including the 7 you're probably going to hit the face off of Velen. Alright? And then you also add in Holy Smite and, you know, GG. Now, if you don't have the Akanai out and Velen persists, then hey, congratulations, Holy Fire is now 10 damage. So, really quite impactful. You can do a lot of things with that. The deck is pretty solid. It plays a lot like every other control variant Priest we've ever seen. There's no Shadow Madness in this. There's no Thought Steals in this. So, for a lot of players, they actually give this deck a lot more respect because, you know, they don't like those shenanigans. But it's a little bit more consistent and definitely a little bit more functional. So it's a really cool deck. Check it out. It'll be a lot of fun. All right, moving away from that, we're going into Rogue. Yes, Rogue. So Sparkaz, who is quite a legendary deck designer, has given us the Tempo Miracle. And before we get to this, no, this is not your traditional Miracle Rogue deck. It is not Miracle in any way, shape, or form. It's just a name he gave it. So please stop sending him complaints about it. He would really appreciate that. All right. So what is this deck? It's a tempo deck. As it states in the name, it's a tempo deck. So you've got your traditional Rogue stuff here, Azure Drakes, SI7, Violent Teacher, Earthen Ring Farseers, hello, Sludge Belchers. I mean, this is all stuff we've seen before. It's not really all that new. Matter of fact, there's only 2 cards in here that are new. Trade Prince and Dr. Boom. While Dr. Boom obviously can go in any damn deck and just be a super powerhouse, Trade Prince Gallywix is a very interesting tech. Trade Prince Gallywix, for all intents and purposes, is a better Lord Walker Cho, but with a body that can actually be offensive. Alright? So the deck uses tempo trades very effectively. Trade Prince is going to deny your opponents wanting to play spells because you're just going to throw that back at them. Where it gets really interesting, though, is in the Priest matchup. There's a video that I made involving Trade Prince Gallywix, which I'll actually throw that link into the description later, where basically playing this guy off curve, like later on in the curve, is very dangerous in the Priest matchup. And the reason why is Mind Control turns it into a giant stalemate to fatigue. And here's why. You spend 10 mana, boom, I grab your Gallywix, but you get Mind Control. So you could grab it right back, because you're never going to want me to have your Gallywix, right? Now you see the endless circle? Meanwhile, you're drawing cards and eventually getting to fatigue, because as you haven't noticed, this deck does run a lot of draw mechanics. The deck that I was facing is very similar to this, except for it had no Edward Van Cleef, but did have a second Shiv. So you can actually mill yourself quite decently because of this deck, and then Priest can definitely take advantage of that with a Mind Control. So it's something you definitely want to get out of the way before you ever play Trade Prince against a Priest. That is my own 2 cents. Alright, take it for what it's worth. But you do mostly tempo trades. You use your spells to empower Violet Teacher, so it's putting out minions so you can use those for trades. Phantom Knives is going to draw you more options as well as produce more tokens. SI7 Agent, pretty standard removal tool. Deadly Poison, pretty standard removal tool. Blade Fury, only one of them in this deck. Sorry. So when this gets used, it's almost always going to be something big. So, yeah. If not, it's just kind of wasted. So, 1 sap. Yeah, that was the other thing, is just the 1 sap is a little odd because sap is kind of a tempo reduction, and having 2 of those kind of really helps out, but I guess it kind of makes sense for this version. And of course, you know, there's Big Game Hunter because nobody likes Dr. Boom. Seriously. But yeah, it's a pretty solid deck, but you must be wary in the Priest matchup. And if they are using Mind Control, you might be in a world of hurt. However, Mind Control has fallen out of favor quite a bit in the meta, but it may come back. We'll see. All right, moving on to Shaman. Now, it's interesting that we go Rogue Shaman here. Rogues used to have Miracle, which, as we kind of covered in that deck, uses a lot of card draw to basically do a huge amount of burst later on. Well, this deck is not that dissimilar. However, this is probably the only deck I've ever seen, other than a gimmick using Alarmobot, that I actually want to have a 9-drop minion in my opening hand. And I'll get to this. Alright, so this Pure Shaman Malygos OTK. This is actually the more recent updated version of this deck. As you can see, there's no Cold Light Oracles, there's no Loot Hoarder or Blood Mage Thanos. And instead, it's literally streamlined itself to the most card-efficient mechanical concept in order to achieve its goal, which that goal is basically punch you in the face for 30 to 40 damage. Oh, and you think I'm kidding. No, I'm not. So the idea here is early game you want to Stormforge Axe. You're less inclined to use like Crackles and Lightning Bolts against your enemy minions if you can absolutely avoid it. Stormforge Axe to kind of deal with stuff. You start building out totems. Get out the Mana Tide as soon as possible just for the card draw. When you can use a Farsight, use it. Azure Drake, pretty good tech here. Anything that's big and can't really allow to stay on the board, you hex it. If you're taking too much damage, you go to the heal bot, which is really, really important. By the way, Alexstrasza also serves a similar function of resetting life. But the idea is to kind of like whittle a little bit on your opponent's life where you can, and then just kind of self-sustain until you can get enough combo pieces to actually win the game. So let's go over the math on this. Malygos played with Ancestor's Call because, well, 21 cards are not minions. Alright? So you're going to get some good luck, good fucking logic in almost always getting this out and getting Malygos on the board. Now, if you use Farsight, there's a very strong chance that you're going to pull a damage spell and reduce its cost. Ideally, the one you really want to pull is Lava Burst, maybe even Lightning Storm, maybe. All right, maybe. But that's like me. But so you're going to want to pull one of these damage spells and reduce its cost. Crackle at 0, okay, that's a little irrelevant, but until you look at the combo, not so much. Lava Burst, reducing that to 0 is huge. It's very, very huge, alright? So, Malygos, 5 spell damage. Alright, so that makes Lava Burst 10. Lightning Bolts, 8. Crackle can get up to 11, though its baseline average is 9.5. Frost Shock. Yes, Frost Shock. There's a card I never thought would actually have an active place in a meta until this. Frost Shock is 6 damage and a freeze. It's literally like an inverted fireball, just way cheaper. So, yeah, you can get some huge value. So, Ancestor's Call, Malygos, GG, well played. Simple as that. If you can get to like turn 10, okay, 4 mana to play the Malygos, and then all of the damage spells are super cheap. Boom, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom, done. All right, this is basically a miracle OTK deck where you have to do very little interactions with your opponent other than, you know, trying to weaken him down some, but even then you don't have to. All right? It's definitely really, really, really nasty. In the case of Warrior Control, Alexstrasza plays a huge role in reducing what they can do. So getting that out early can do some amazing things. All right. So, yeah. It's definitely a very, very dangerous deck to deal with. So, yeah. Definitely dangerous. Though, Ancestor and Call on turn 4 with Malygos, I would never do this. And here's why. All they need is a silence, which at turn 4, they have access to all of them. So, this is never something you really want to put out there unless you can instantly get some massive value out of it. Alright? Never want to do that. And it's also good to see, you know, Farsight and Ancestor's Call, 2 cards that were generally considered to be absolute garbage, put into use and actually be effective. Now remember, this is a gimmick deck. This is possibly not going to work a lot of the time, but when it does, it's quite amazing. With practice, you can make this deck work a lot more efficiently for you. I would not be surprised to see people maybe playing this in a tournament, just because we saw how popular and powerful Miracle Rogue was. This could almost be on par with that in many ways. So, time will tell. Alright, moving on over to Warlock. Alright, so Warlock has a lot of interesting things out there. Now, this deck is kind of, well, more a control variant, similar to handlock, but a little bit more interesting interactions for aggro. Most notably, mage, which has been kind of a thorn in handlock's side, quite honestly. So let's take a look at this. They dropped 1 Twilight Drake to add in a couple other things, and they dropped a few other things as well. So, Lord Jaraxxus, okay, standard. Malygos, alright, interesting. Sylvanas, Black Knight, Big Game Hunter, Mountain Giant, Ancient Watcher, Defender, you know, okay, you kind of get the point. A lot of handlock stuff here, and then you see the Void Caller and like going, what's Void Caller for? Well, the Void Caller is there for a very important reason. Wait, what's Sense Demons for? Ah, yes, the Void Caller. So the idea here is you want to sense demons and hope you don't get Lord Jaraxxus, because that'll kind of ruin things. So you sense demons, you hope to get Malygos, but if you get a Floating Watcher, that's okay. If you get Void Caller, that's okay. But you really want to get that Malygos, because having Void Caller play Malygos is really impactful. If you do, however, get Lord Jaraxxus, just play this like your typical handlock. Sorry to say. But if you get Malygos out early enough, you can just create havoc left and right. You can tap without ever losing any life. Malygos is just going to infuriate the fuck out of your opponents. Alright. Floating Watcher is a really interesting thing to get off of Void Caller into play. That means next turn, when you can actually interact with the board, congratulations, you can make this a 6/6. And actually, you can make it even higher depending on where you are on the curve, because you can tap, then Hellfire, then go face. I had a lot of fun doing that, by the way. It was lots of fun. So yeah, it's a very interesting take on handlock to kind of be able to be a little bit more well-rounded to deal with aggro, but at the same time, it is giving up some more control-y aspects that I think might inevitably hurt it. So definitely something to play in the lower ranks, but definitely above 5, you may want to move to the more traditional. Alright, and the last deck we will be covering is the Warrior. Now, last week I did an aggro warrior. I've shown control warrior. A lot of them are pretty much identical to each other with maybe one card difference here. This week I'm doing a mill. Yes, mill. Never thought I would see the day where warrior was actually classified as a mill class, but yes, it technically can be, but in a very interesting way. Okay, so the ultimate Jugger Mill Warrior. By the name, you kind of figure out this is some sort of gimmick with the Iron Juggernaut. And yes, it is. A lot of people have been working on this concept and been playing around with it. I know my boy Nox has been doing some interesting testing with that on his stream, sure. But he's not the only one, and obviously other people have been trying this. So, here we go. The idea of the deck is basically to control what your opponents are going to put out there, stave off any damage that you can to kind of get to more important things. Use things like Death Lords to force them to draw or get more of their cards out of their deck and into play, which will actually cause their deck size to shrink quite quickly, especially when you consider, there's a lots of other ways of doing this, like, you know, Cold Light Oracle. Now, what gets really fun with this is you have two different ways of kind of screwing them over. One of which is by using Iron Juggernaut and then bouncing it back with Brewmaster. Another interesting way of doing this is hitting them with Alexstrasza when they're low, then the next turn playing Iron Juggernaut, followed up by Cold Light Oracle, and hopefully getting them into fatigue. And oh, look at that, they just took that 10 damage, and then Alexstrasza runs in, finishes them off. This does happen quite a bit. When I was playing this deck, I had that happen several times. And to be honest, I got a lot of hate for playing this deck. The word cheesy and bastard were said quite often. So it's actually quite fun. What I really like about this deck is it actually has mechanics that can counter a lot of different decks out there, specifically Paladin. Alright, so you look at Death Spite's Death Rattle effect and combine that with Exploding or Explosive Sheep. Congratulations, muster for battle is white. And oh, look at that, you've actually cleared the entire thing that they could set up with that. So that's really important. And if you don't want to go that route, you've also got Whirlwind to Explosive Sheep as well. So this is in many ways a mill outlast deck that kind of shortens your ability to outlast quite significantly. Much in the same way the Kalento Mage also does. So I really like this. It's quite good because it's Warrior. They have lots of defensive options. I mean, we got Shield Slam, which works great with Shield Block, which, hey, great defensive option there. You got Cleaves because aggro sucks. You got Shield Maidens because, well, again, defense. You know, it's how you get life back. And Anti-Healbot because healing matters. It really does. You can't just always hide behind armor. You eventually will run out, and then your life total really does matter. So, really huge thing right there, especially when, you know, they play down Alexstrasza. Well, congratulations, you can Anti-Healbot, Whirlwind, execute, and buy yourself some time. So, I like that. Alright, now that will do it all for the GvG meta report. However, we do have one other little story here. Recently, Sneasel Shredder won the RNG lottery. However, when reporters went to go ask him what's going on. They came to find out that he would not be going home with all the winnings, but he had to divide them amongst a few people. Most notably of this was Kel'Thuzad, his brother Kel'Thuzad, and his other brother Kel'Thuzad. This led to a lot of upset feelings, staff members at ESL literally in complete shock, people speechless who were doing casting, and poor Tice left in a puddle of his own salty tears. But when asked for an interview, Sneed said, "See Ben Brode." All right, that'll about wrap it up for this edition of the GvG Meta Report. Remember, folks, if you like these shows, please like, subscribe, share them with your friends, any place you want. I really don't have any preferences. If you'd like to support the show in other ways, don't forget to check out our Patreon campaign, as well as you could contact me in the email that will be provided in the description, along with all the deck lists. I will give you further information on how you can possibly do that. But again, thank you everybody for watching. Have yourself a very safe and wonderful week. And remember, it's still warm in Florida. Bye-bye.